Been a little while since the last episode because I've been working, and whilst I've been working, I've been using SQLite as my file format to save stuff to. In my opinion, best way to save stuff to disk is not to write your own file format or to do JSON or YAML. Is if it doesn't need to be edited by a human, just write it to an SQL database. But one of the main problems I think is you write your schema, but then when you need to change it, how do you do that migration? So I'm going to show you the bare bones migration pattern that I use, and it's always been fine. There'll be one function called open database, which is the only way to open a database in the whole application. And when that connection is returned to you, it's guaranteed that it will have been migrated to the latest version. Anything below this dotted line is example usage code, and everything above it is our library code. So here's our function, open database. Let's start putting stuff in. Okay, off to a good start. We opened a connection and then ensure it gets closed by wrapping it in a closing context manager. And our database should exist there. Okay, inside the database, we'll have a special table called, in this case, migrations, and it will contain one row that says what version of the database this currently is. So we're going to write a function that gets the current version. We open the database and then we try and get the version here. We select just one column from this special table and return the first row, pull out the version and return that. No such table migrations. Now when we get that error, I'm going to say we're on database version -1. We catch this operation error, which is this error we saw here, and if the error message there is identical to the error message we received here, we're going to assume that means the database migration system hasn't been initialized. So we just return -1. And if that's not the case, then we just return the normal version. So now we should see it print out -1. If the version's currently -1, we need to initialize the migration table. We get the version, and if the version comes back as -1, then we call this migrate to 0. In migrate to 0, we open a fresh cursor and we create a migrations table. The first column is ID, just a standard integer primary key, but it's this check here at the end that's important. We basically say that ID can only be 1, which essentially means we can only ever have one row in this table. Below that is the version column where we're going to store the current version of the database, and we're just checking that it's always a non-negative integer. Finally, strict. Probably want to have strict on all your tables, to be honest. Then we insert the single row that we're allowed, and we're saying ID1 version 0. The first time we call get version, it's going to return -1 because the table doesn't exist. So we're going to match this case migrate to version 0. Let's just say print initializing migrations. Okay, let's give that a go. Perfect. And if we run it again, what happens? It says initializing migration. It shouldn't say initializing migrations. Why does it say initializing migrations? Of course, transactions. We've got auto commit false on this. Auto commit false means always be in a transaction, and we've not called commit. So we did these changes, but no one called commit. When this context manager exits, it's going to call commit if there was no exception, or rollback if there was an exception. So now it should have committed those changes. Fantastic. Now we've initialized the migration process, we need to actually put in some application tables and data. So let's pretend that we are a furniture shop and we want to track the tables that we are selling. When the version is 0, we want to migrate to version 1. Quick thing, what happens if we haven't run it before, so we have a -1 database? We need to make sure that we run all of the migrations until we're fully migrated. So let's stick this in a while loop. If I remember rightly, there's a bug that means this can be null. Yeah, I remember. It's a historical oversight that primary keys can contain null, so I can't remember whether that applies or not, so I always just think, just write not null. That way you don't have to worry about it. This is our tables table where we store information about the tables of furniture shop sells. Our primary key is a serial number for the table. It cannot be empty, it cannot be null, and it must be unique. Width and depth of the table in millimeters, which means they can be integers. They can't be null. We're not selling negative dimension table. Then once we've done the migration, we need to upgrade the migrations table to say that that's what's been done. So let's run the code now. Why didn't that work? Oh! We need to change that from pass to break. Silly me. And if we go from a fresh database, it ran both migrations and then returned the connection. Let's put some data in our database. We're going to insert 3 tables into the tables table. An oak table, medium size, a little bit larger oak table, then quite a large pine table. Imagine we want to add a Boolean flag to say whether they're sold or not. Here's our first proper migration. SQLite doesn't support all of the table altering commands that other databases like Postgres support. So there's a somewhat convoluted but pretty much always the same pattern that you follow to do a table migration. You start by creating a temporary table, which is going to be the migrated version of the original. I always just put next underscore table name. So next tables is going to be the same as this, but with our is sold column. There's a temptation to copy and paste the schema from the previous migration, but that's generally a bad idea. There's no guarantee that that's going to be currently what it is. So the best solution is to use the SQLite command line tool, open up a fully migrated database and do .schema the table you're migrating. This will also include any indexes created on that table, which is important to restore those as well after. Remember, there's no true Boolean data type in SQLite, but that's how I create something that's as good as. And I always put is underscore at the front, so I know that it's not really an integer. We're copying the existing data from the original tables into these columns here, and then the migration part is sold. We're initializing it to false. Drop the old version of the tables and rename next tables back to the original name. Mark that we have upgraded to version 2, and then we're going to exit this context manager, and that will commit our changes. db.sqlite 3 is a database on version 1, so when we run it we should see it migrate to version 2. Then when it prints the rows out, it just have a false column in the end, which is our new sold column. And by false I mean 0. So that's the basic pattern. Each time you want to upgrade, you write your migration there and then add a new case. So when someone calls open database, we'll open one connection, do all the migration, close it down and return them a fresh connection. And that way, anything weird we have to do for a migration doesn't leak out into the rest of the application. Let's just run this code, check it still works. Yep, and it printed out the same columns as before. And let's try it on a fresh database to see if it still runs the migrations. Yeah, and if we run it again, it doesn't do it. Okay, fantastic. We need to turn foreign keys on. We need to turn the write-ahead log journal on, and we need to change synchronization from normal to full so that if the power gets pulled out whilst we're migrating the database, it's not completely destroyed. We're also going to make the change to auto commit true, which means won't always be in a transaction, which is something that we need in order to do all of the migrations that we'll probably want to do. No, I can't remember. I'm getting them from my notes. How close was I? Foreign keys, got that right. Journal mode, got that right. Did not get synchronous right. I'll create a helper that opens a transaction and then returns a cursor and then makes sure it's all closed, and it commits if there wasn't an exception and rolls back if there was. Sometimes you want to open a transaction just in case you accidentally modify something, but you really want it to be read-only. If you say roll back true, it's going to always roll back. In get version, we don't want to modify the database. Is it a lot of text? Yes. There's ways to dry it out and put the migration SQL in their own files, but this is the basic pattern. Hope it helps. Like, subscribe. See you later.